Well, thanks very much, Stephen. Thanks for that, and thanks for having me here. I wanted today to try to give us some of those moments of unwarranted optimism that we just heard about by looking at our past. As Utah Phillips, the IWW, the Wobblies singer, storyteller, and agitator, was always fond of remarking, the long memory is the most radical idea in the country. It is the loss of that long memory which deprives our people of that connective flow of thoughts and events that clarifies our vision, not of where we're going, but of where we want to go. So it's in the spirit of Utah Phillips and the spirit of this conference and the amazing range of history and ecology and science that I want to talk a little bit then about some of these moments in Canadian history that give us some unwarranted optimism. And I'm talking today about Canadian events because I'm in the United States and so I'm doing Canadian labor history, and I can sound like an authority, but I want to promise you when I go back to Canada, I'm going to tell people I'm an expert in US law. I want to talk about Canada though, because when you compare Canada and the United States, Canada often comes off very blandly. Several years ago, the New Republic ran a contest for the most boring headline that could be imagined. And the winner of that contest was Worthwhile Canadian Initiative. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the equivalent of NPR some years ago, ran a similar contest. If the American phrase is, as American as apple pie, what would the Canadian equivalent be? And the winner of that contest was, as Canadian as possible under the circumstances. So people often say, well, you know, what lessons could you possibly have to tell us about history? After all, in the United States, well, your Declaration of Independence calls for life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The Canadian Constitution calls for peace, order, and good government. It's not the same evocative cry. But I'm here because my point is that if there are moments of hope, even in the peaceable dominion, as Canadians like to refer to the country to the north, if there are moments there of inspiration and hope, then we can find them anywhere. And since we have a common border and some common experiences, many differences of course, but our countries are in some ways alike, when we look to points, to episodes, to people that are similar, it may help Americans think that the United States is not as exceptional as some of the speakers today alluded, seeing American exceptionalism as a problem. It may be that it's not quite so exceptional. Special, sure, absolutely, you're special. But maybe not unique in that same kind of a way. And it may be that if the things I'm going to talk about, which today are particularly tactics of direct action, if they can even flourish in the cold, frozen north, that may be instructional to everyone, just as we today have learned from everything from Luddites to the Zapatista movement. And it's also a reminder of two other things. And one is that this is a capitalist system that we are part of. And one of the definitive parts of that system is the fact of wage labor. Arguably, that is the definitive part of capitalism. And it is worthwhile reminding ourselves that workers have pioneered many of the forms of civil disobedience that other movements use today, from sit-ins to marches to sabotage. And it is also, I think, worthwhile reminding ourselves, as C. Wright Mills did over 50 years ago, that even when the labor movement seems to be pursuing very narrow economic aims, an increase in wages, a reduction in hours, these have, at some level, a radical core to them. C. Wright Mills reminded us that, after all, a fight for more wages is also a fight to redistribute wealth. The fight for shorter hours is a fight over who controls work and the work process. So with those two things in mind, I want to turn to some of the events in Canadian history that might be interesting and perhaps even useful. Now, I have to say this first picture of the police cordon is not exactly, in the face of it, a moment of unwarranted optimism. And yet, in a way it is. Because in Vancouver in 1912, as had happened in the United States, both previous to this and afterwards, the city officials banned the industrial workers of the world, the Wobblies, from speaking on street corners. In Vancouver, this took place at what was called the Powell Street grounds, now called Oppenheimer Park, if you ever care to visit and take a look there. The Wobblies, the Socialist Party of Canada, lots of people use the grounds on Saturdays as a kind of Hyde's corner, speaker's corner. But in 1912, the city shut it down. Well, it shut it down to the Wobblies and socialists on the grounds that they were disturbing the public order. But as they all pointed out, they didn't ban the Salvation Army, which with its drums and its trumpets, they were the real obstruction. They were the ones scaring the horses, after all, not the speeches here. And the Wobblies fought back. They fought back the way they fought back in many cities across North America, not by filing writs, not by petitioning the government, which I would argue is very worthwhile work, but it also needs to be augmented sometimes by what we in Canada politely refer to as extra-parliamentary activity. The Wobblies simply took the common space. They took over the commons physically. They sent out notices through newspapers and telegrams to Wobbly headquarters across North America saying, come to Vancouver to get arrested, to jump on a soapbox, to start a speech, to get pulled off, thrown in jail, to put pressure on the city to restore the right of freedom of speech by literally seizing the common. We see here some of the arrests at that free speech fight, and hundreds came to Vancouver. They tried to shut the border down, but it was pretty porous in those days and didn't much matter to most of these people anyway. Nationality was more of a notion than something you had to carry in your pocket in the form of a passport. And after they arrested dozens of them over a couple of different weeks, and the Wobblies got more and more creative, when they were banned from the streets, they actually got rowboats and rowed out into the Pacific around Stanley Park and addressed the crowds through giant megaphones to still make their point. And one guy tried to actually get money to buy a hot air balloon so they could address the crowds below. But even the dumbest city official soon figured out that it was costing the city a fortune to keep these men housed and fed in prisons. And they opened the jails, and free speech was once again available for workers in the streets of Vancouver. Now, if you know anything about the Wobblies, you know that they acted on a principle, one that Woody Guthrie summed up very nicely when he said that a good song is worth about a dozen even sermons. So, to that end, nice thing about all these great jobs is the people who see me folk sing think I'm a pretty good glazier, and the glaziers think I'm a pretty good folk singer, and you know. I wrote songs about what they did, and there's one here you can actually come and work with me here. A song by a man named Joe Hill. You'll notice it was based on a hymn, as lots of good songs were, but there's a call and response feature to this. So when we get to the chorus, you will see parts in parentheses. That's your part to come in on here. So this picks up on the critique that while the Wobblies were often banned for fighting for the commons, Salvation Army was allowed to preach. The long-haired preachers come out every night, try to tell you what's wrong and what's right. But when asked about something to eat, they will answer with voices so sweet. Are you ready? Because this is your part coming up. You will lead great by and by in that glorious land in the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. That was fabulous, thank you. That never happens in Canada. And the Starvation Army they play, and they sing and they clap and they pray, till they get all your coin on the drum. And they'll tell you when you're on the bum that you will eat by and by, in that glorious land above the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. And one reason it's hard for people to sing along is I just realize I never sing the thing the same way twice. Holy rollers and jumpers come out, and they holler, they jump, and they shout. Give your money to Jesus, they say. He will cure all diseases today. And you will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. That's a lie. If you fight hard for husband or wife, try to get something good in this life. You're a sinner and a bad one, they tell. When you die, you will sure go to hell. And you will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. And you'll get pie in the sky when you die. That's a lie. Working folks of all countries unite. Side by side we for freedom will fight. When the world and its wealth we have given, to the grafters we'll sing this refrain. And your voice, your change just a little bit here, so pay attention. You will eat by and by when you've learned how to cook and to fry, chop some wood, they'll do ya good. And you will in the sweet by and by. That's no lie. All right, thank you. You're loud and you're kind. That's what Canadians always think about Americans. No, so. All right. Those are good things. That song was written by Joe Hill, who, as many of you know, was later executed in the state of Utah for singing songs and stuff. The Wobblies, however, and Joe Hill actually came to Canada. One of the points I want to make of this shared experience, sometimes the very people came across a very fluid border to fight for justice and fight for the commons. And Hill played another part in a Wobbly struggle in British Columbia for the railway navvies building the second of the transcontinental railways that crossed Canada. This one finished in 1912, the Canadian Northern Railway, in very tough conditions. Some of the worst stuff, though, is not on the job, but in the very bunkhouses that people lived while making the camps. And organizing this workforce was very difficult because it was a polyglot workforce. People from around the world. The Vancouver Sun, one of the daily newspapers of the day, said that the railway is being built by the scum of the earth. The worst people you can imagine. People with mother-forgotten tongues. The dregs of Europe are here. I'm quoting here, literally. The only good thing we can say about them is that they're not Chinese. The Wobblies organized everybody. They organized everybody in a 1,000-mile picket line. That is, as they shut down work on the line, they sent organizers down as far as San Francisco and Los Angeles to prevent the job sharks from signing people up to go and break the strike in British Columbia. And the workers did something else. They were protesting primarily the terrible working conditions on the railway line. Now, there's a problem if you go on strike because you hate the place you're living in. What that means is you spend a lot more time in the crummy bunkhouse because you're not working. And so they created their own bunkhouses. They built them up to the provincial health codes and beyond. We know that because the province tried to break the strike by sending in the health inspectors, who said, these camps are great. They're better than the camps that they were provided by the... We can't shut them down. They also organized over 8,000 workers into one newspaper called Miniature Socialist Republics. They organized their own space. They created their own commons. They organized feeding 8,000 people. They housed them, they fed them, they created even a small justice system where you would take turns sitting on a tribunal, and if there was fighting or alcohol problems, something like that, you would be escorted. We heard earlier about making citizens' arrests, and these people declared themselves citizens of their own socialist republics, and they would take people up to the tribunal, which would sentence them to perhaps bringing in armloads of firewood for the camp cooks. Police themselves for several weeks. We know that because the police tried to arrest them for being disorderly, but couldn't do it. They weren't. Joe Hill did come across to British Columbia, and you know what's coming. He wrote a song. I'm told that the actual tune for this is a song called Where the Shannon River Flows, but you wouldn't know it from the way I sing it. There's a chorus here, though, so you have to come in on that part. Now, the strike took place mostly up and down the Fraser River, that some of you may have heard of. Fellow workers, pay attention to what I'm going to mention, for it is the fixed intention of the workers of the world. And I hope you'll all be ready, true-hearted, brave and steady, to rally around our standard when the red flag is unfurled. Here's the chorus. You will get marked for participation. Where the Fraser River flows, each fellow worker knows they've bullied and oppressed us, but still our union grows. And we're gonna find a way, boys, shorter hours and better pay, boys, and we're gonna win the day, boys, where the Fraser River flows. For these gunny sack contractors have all been dirty actors, and they're not our benefactors, as each fellow worker knows. So we've got to stick together and find a dirty weather, and we'll show no white feather where the Fraser River flows. Where the Fraser River flows, each fellow worker knows they've bullied and oppressed us, but still our union grows. And we're gonna find a way, boys, shorter hours and better pay, boys, and we're gonna win the day, boys, where the Fraser River flows. Now, the strike was broken by exactly the way it's described here. The police were sent in and arrested about 300 or so of them, breaking their own laws in the process. Now the boss of the law is stretching bulls and pimps. He's fetching and they are fine collection, as Jesus only knows. But why their mothers reared them and why the devil spared them are questions we can't answer where the Fraser River flows. You can all come in on the chorus. You proved you could do it before. Where the Fraser River flows, each fellow worker knows they've bullied and oppressed us, but still our union grows. And we're gonna find a way, boys, shorter hours and better pay, boys, and we're gonna win the day, boys, where the Fraser River flows. Well, the strike was broken. We see here members of the Wobblies being arrested and sent and jailed in Kamloops. And this was one of many struggles at the same time. Many of you here will, of course, be familiar with the terrible events at Ludlow, Colorado. in the same time period, where striking miners were surrounded by the militia. Their tents were set on fire, and several of them were shot and killed, others burned to death in that terrible episode. In British Columbia, a similar kind of industrial warfare also broke out. The Vancouver Island coal mine strike raged for 2 long years. We see here a parade down this town of Ladysmith of the miners' union and their families headed with a big brass band. The militia was called out, and sadly those days in the United States and Canada's militias were often formed by university students, and in many places they were happy to go out and have a whack at the horny-handed miners. The miners whacked back with some of the tools that they used daily, such as dynamite. Now, no one was killed in this, but the picture shows the real contrast in the dynamite of the miners and the organized power of the state. You'll remember Belloc's famous saying, "Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not." These weapons of mass destruction, of course, first used against indigenous people and working people here. I spoke about those cross-border connections, and often in the case of the Wobblies and Joe Hill, they were great. Sometimes they were a little more unseemly, and here's one of them. The fellow on the right, some of you may recognize John D Rockefeller, of course, the owner of the mines at Ludlow, Colorado. You might not know the picture, the face in the middle. A guy named William Leier Mackenzie King. But if you ever come to Canada and you look at our brightly colored and picturesque money, and you see an increasingly rare sight, a $50 bill, you will see his face on it. He was Canada's most successful prime minister, if you judge success by time in office, anyway. And Mackenzie King, in the aftermath of the Ludlow, Colorado massacre, was hired by John D Rockefeller as a kind of PR man. Spent a lot of time talking about what an enlightened employer John D Rockefeller was. Mackenzie King, previously to hiring out in 1912 to the Rockefellers, had written Canada's first real piece of labor legislation, something called the Industrial Disputes Investigations Act. And in the 1940s wrote other legislation. He's prime minister from 1920 to 1930, again in the 20s, and then again from 35 to 48 or so, so quite a long time in office, but made his career as a reasonable labor statesperson. That's how he billed himself. And that was particularly useful for him when he's first seeking power, which he does in 1920, because the year before, 1919, was in Canada and the United States, of course, the year of the general strike. You're celebrating now the 90th anniversary of the Seattle general strike, but I'm here to tell you, we had a bigger and better one in Winnipeg. Right? It lasted for several weeks. The entire city was shut down and brought to a standstill. It was originally a fight over another part of the commons, I would argue, the right to bargain collectively, and to create workers' own institutions for collective bargaining. Specifically, metal trades workers wanted to bargain as a council, so they could not be pitted against each other by an unscrupulous employer or sets of employers. They wanted to band together to bargain as a group of trades. The dream of the Wobblies, if you like, one big union of all the workers. The fascinating thing, the reason the Winnipeg general strike is an expression of an unwarranted optimism, is that half the workers who went on strike didn't even belong to unions. The first people to go on strike, they jumped 4 hours ahead of the deadline, were the telephone operators. The hello girls unplugged themselves from the headsets, walked off the job. Postal workers went on strike, and that was a federal offense for them to go off the job. Workers were fabulously creative with this strike. My favorite episode, the civic workers, the waterworks crews, turned down the water pressure to the city, so you couldn't pump water more than 2 stories in a building. Their rationale was, we're going to shut down all the office towers, and no worker in town has a house with more than 2 stories in it. So you might be on the hill, baby, but you're not flushing. Right? So, how great was Winnipeg? Well, Canadians always judge ourselves by what Americans think of us. Winnipeg was so great that we made the New York Times. The only other time we make the front page is in 1935 when the Dion quintuplets are born. So this is some unwarranted optimism, perhaps, here. And the key, the symbolic moment of the Winnipeg General Strike was when the workers stopped the streetcars. I know you're getting a new light transit system operating sometime soon in Seattle, is that right? I think I read that at the hotel last night as I was trying to think of something to say. And certainly Vancouver boasts about its SkyTrain. It stinks, but they boast. Yeah. Streetcars, same function. So stopping the streetcars was a moment of empowerment for workers. They seized that public space. In the middle of the strike, the city politicos and the business groups formed something called the Citizens Committee of 1000. The whole thing was a lie. Oh, they may have been citizens, but it didn't much matter. There weren't 1,000 of them. They weren't a committee. They became an unelected power. They were essentially a provisional government, a coup, if you like. And they paid somebody, what some people like to call replacement workers, but we in Canada still call scabs, to run a streetcar down the middle of a mass demonstration. You can see the response here. They rocked the streetcar, they set it on fire, they pulled the replacement worker out and beat him to his senses. At which point, however, the police and militia waiting in the side streets charged the crowds. The circle there shows you the crumpled body of Mike Sokolovsky, who was shot and killed by the police as they charged up and down. As workers tried to flee, they found more police and militia waiting for them, and again, machine guns used to break the Winnipeg General Strike. Why are you saying, I know? Why is this a moment of unwarranted optimism? Several reasons. First, they did it. They went on strike. One of these moments when, against the odds, people did what they could do with what they had. And what they had, of course, were their own bodies that they put out there to fight the power of business, the power of capital, the power of the state. The other thing that happened is while the Winnipeg General Strike was lost in the sense that workers did not make immediate demands, the following year, some of the undesirables and riffraff of the province were elected to municipal councils, to provincial legislatures, and to the federal government in Ottawa. For Canada, one of the other after effects was that in 1918, the Canadian government was about to abolish the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Mounties, probably, I'm guessing, the most known symbol of Canada. Not even that, okay. Tall, strapping people they are with big hats and red jackets and sidearms, and there's many myths about how one Mountie stopped hordes of Yankee whiskey traders from polluting our fair shores. It was originally called the Northwest Mounted Police. It was a regional police force. The Canadians actually wanted to do what you had done in the United States, to use the army to exterminate native people so you could build rail. I don't mean you personally, because as we've heard earlier, of course, people are not the same as governments. Canada wanted to do the same thing, but they couldn't afford it. They had to be nicer because the Americans were spending about $20 million a year fighting Indian wars, and $20 million a year was $1 million a year more than the entire federal budget in Canada. So they sent out a police force, a regional police force, that they were going to abolish by 1918, because the frontiers have been pretty quiet for a long time. The Winnipeg General Strike, however, convinced them that they actually need the police force. And so I'm not sure it's exactly a warranted optimism, but I'm here to tell you that if not for the Winnipeg General Strike, there would be no Mounties. It's a Pyrrhic victory, sure. I want to jump ahead, because I'm getting funny looks from Stephen here, to another event, because of course we are entering or in the middle of a depression. And in the 1930s, the United States made some significant inroads, things like the Wagner Act, things like the National Recovery Act, public works. That did not happen in Canada. We had the hobo jungles, you called Hoover towns, I think, here in the United States. We called them, Bennett towns. He was the Prime Minister then. But instead of things like the National Recovery Act and the Wagner Act, what Canadians got were relief camps, organized by the Army, where healthy young men who were the bulk of the unemployed, or at least that were counted as unemployed, were shipped off to camps in faraway places to work for 20 cents a day, which would buy you either 2 packages of cigarettes or 3 condoms, which were illegal, so you probably couldn't even get those. Right? And were put to work using very simple tools, picks and shovels, to build roads that started nowhere and ended nowhere, simply as projects to keep people busy. The reason the relief camps were created was, of course, the hobo jungles were breeding grounds for communism. So that's the language that they used. And they were quite accurate. What they didn't realize, however, was if you took all of these people, many of whom you had trained to organize, work together, and fire rifles in the First World War, if you took them all together off the streets and put them in a camp, you didn't really solve the breeding ground problem. The relief camp workers, in fact, formed their own unions, came down to Vancouver, walked out en masse, and on May Day 1935 held one of several rallies, again seizing the commons with their bodies to make a political point, to demand work and wages, to demand an end to the relief camps, to demand that the government use the common property created by all to look after all. And the protest was incredibly powerful and supported very broadly. One of the great things about unemployment rates that hit as high as 30% was everyone's pretty much in the same boat. Everybody knew somebody that was unemployed. I think it was one of your presidents that said the difference between a recession and a depression is a recession is when your neighbor has lost his job, a depression is when you've lost your job. And so we see here a picture of the Mother's Day March in 1935 to abolish the relief camps. They formed a giant human heart in Stanley Park, the jewel of Vancouver, to have the relief camps shut down and to support the men that had left the camps. Well, the men did more than just leave the camps and take into the cities. They organized something called the On to Ottawa Trek. They jumped aboard freight trains and tried to ride to the capital of Canada, which is about $47. No, sorry. That was a very bad joke. Capital of Canada is not $47, it's Ottawa. Sorry, I didn't say humorist in that job description that I got. Rode to Ottawa, tried to ride to Ottawa, to protest directly to the Prime Minister. Again, seizing, in a sense, the commons, the railways that these men themselves had built just a few years before. You've heard the great song by Yip Harburg, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? Once I built a railroad, made it run against time. Once I built a railway, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? This was, of course, the reality for these people. They at first thought that they were going to get nowhere with this. While the Communist Party was very active in organizing, they didn't actually call for the On to Ottawa Trek. It happened spontaneously at a mass meeting. People were saying, well, what do we do now? We've had the Mother's May Day heart, we've done the demonstrations, we've actually occupied some buildings, what do we do now? And somebody said, I say we go to Ottawa. And the communist organizer said, can't do it. There is no way we can take 1,000, 2,000 people, transport them illegally across the country, feed them, organize them. It's not going to work. And the people said, we're doing it anyway. And by the time they got to Kamloops, the site where the Wobblies had been arrested in 1912, they found people waiting for them, giving them food. As they make their way through the Rockies, they stop at Golden. They found that people there have pulled out some of those big old clawfoot bathtubs and built fires under them and cooked stew for them. At every place along the line, they find more and more support, more and more help. They pioneered something in Vancouver they called snake dancing. Some of you have heard of. You sort of link arms and you weave your way through the streets. Makes it harder for the police to arrest you. This caught on as a hugely popular tactic. When they get to Calgary, big city by Canadian standards, people came out and said, can you show us a snake dance? They said, well, you know, we just do it as a protest. No, we want to see the snake dance. You know? And they did. They're like, okay, fine, we'll do the stupid snake dance. That's how popular this trek was. Of course, like all of these treks, they had a song. They had a theme song called Hold the Fort. It was the theme song because they have one musical instrument. They had an accordion. And the only song that Comrade Marsh could play was Hold the Fort. So it became their theme song by default, and you can help sing it. We meet today in freedom's cause and raise our voices high. We'll join our hands in union strong to battle or to die. You can do better. See our numbers still increasing. Hear the bugles blow. By our union we shall triumph over every foe. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Unionists, be strong. Side by side. Organizational part here. I want you to turn to the person beside you, because I can tell, you may not, I can tell, some of you are only moving your mouths. If that person is beside you, nudge him a little. Don't be mean, but just help. Let's just try it once more, because frankly, you started off great, but the last time was pathetic. So hold the fort, for we are coming. Unionists, be strong. That is so much better. Side by side we battle onward. Victory will come. Yeah. Well, you just gave me a moment of unwarranted optimism. Thank you. That totally rocked. I know time is short, so I'm going to jump through the next 20-minute part of my show, which was the occupation of another commons a few years later, the post office, the main post office in Vancouver. You can see here, maybe you can't, The caption, "Hold the fort for we are coming," because they still only knew one song. But again, seize the commons. There's no better representation of the state power than a giant brick building that had been built by the workers of Canada. And they occupied it. They seized it and held it for several weeks. The mail kept going. You could walk in, you could buy your stamps, you could say, "Hi, George, hi, Martha." But they make the point to press the government, now the government of William Lyon Mackenzie King, who I showed you earlier, to fight for work and for wages. Again, as it happened with the Ottawa Trek, broken up by police, by tear gas. But this time the response was different. After the police burst in on the men after several weeks there, when news came out of the police attack, thousands of workers flooded the streets in protest against the police brutality. We see here Helena Gutteridge, a labor activist and early suffragist activist, a Vancouver City Councillor, speaking at one of the demonstrations now held in defense of the people attacked by the police. Yes, even in Canada, home of the Mounties, home of peace, order, and good government, they pried up pavement, pried up cobblestones, and pelted the police. Now, I'm not speaking as an advocate for this action. What I am saying is that people do this. And so let me echo the words of Laura Nader earlier. How do we fight back? With everything you got. That's one of the lessons, I guess, that I think of as a historian. And let me just jump ahead to a fascinating charter strike wave activity, but actually to 2004. When the Hospital Employees Union in Canada organized hospital workers, orderlies, maintenance people, cooks, all kinds of people, not nurses and doctors. Does anybody organize? God organizes doctors, I guess. That's the joke. The difference between God and doctors is God doesn't think he's a doctor. Found their contract literally ripped up by the provincial government. That said, yeah, we signed a contract, but we're just going to rip it up and not listen to it. We're going to cut your wages by 10%. We're going to allow contracting out, privatize your jobs. We are going to change unilaterally the conditions of work. And the Hospital Employees Union fought back by, again, taking to the streets, by seizing opportunities and actual physical space to make their point. And of course, you'll notice that these pictures are different from some of the other ones because, of course, the world changed. For one thing, somewhere in the 1950s, it became a world not of black and white, but of color. But these, of course, are not pictures of men in cloth caps. The Hospital Employees Union, about 85% women, many of them women of color. And we see this in the pictures, and my point here, again, a moment of warranted optimism that as people change, struggles grow, new solidarities are constantly being forged, constantly being made here. The HEW was ordered back to work, but the fabulous thing about this was that they had all kinds of support from the rest of the labor movement. A labor movement like that of the United States that has been under attack for the last 30 years. Now, I have to boast a little bit. In Canada, labor's doing a little bit better than it is in the United States. About 30% of workers in Canada belong to unions. I think in here it's about 10, 12%, roughly. Since nobody knows, let me tell you definitively, yes, it's about 10% in the United States. We've managed to hang on. And, sorry? Maybe less? It's unwarranted optimism, what can I say? My point then, just quickly, is that this struggle has very deep roots, even in the peaceable Dominion, that the struggle does continue. It's a struggle that is waged by all kinds of people, particularly by working people. And the point, perhaps, that I want to leave us with as a historian is a paraphrase of Bertolt Brecht. I want to suggest that history does not have to be a mirror to reflect society. History can be a hammer to smash it, or parts of it. Thank you.